What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations, 2020 Best Podcast News Award winner, 2018 Innovation Award winner, both of those given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. And I host the only online broadcast in the world for fathers and dads. That is sponsored by Dove Men Care, and it's also co-sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization. One other thing I do too, I am the board chair for the Global Food and Drink Initiative, which is a multimedia not-for-profit that showcases Blacks in the diaspora, there we go, that are doing their thing in food, wine, and travel. As always, I like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. We are broadcasting live on May 16th, and it's a Sunday afternoon. So most Sunday afternoons around 5 o'clock, we do Black Canada Talking. What's Black Canada Talking? It's a live online event that provides Black Canadians the opportunity to give their takes and POVs on stories that are of importance to them. And we also showcase Black Canadians. And we have another new friend, not to me, but to maybe many of you today, a gentleman who I've been blessed to know for a long time, who has been pushing in a good way, in a good direction, to advance the voices and thoughts of Black Canadians across this nation, and indeed around the world. His name is Phil Vassell. He's the artistic director of the Sauga Music Festival and Conference and the executive director of the Toronto Urban Music Festival Incorporated, which has produced the TUMF, the Toronto Urban Music Festival, and the IRIE Music Festival. He was a co-founder and publisher of Word Magazine, Canada's award-winning Black culture magazine, which was published successfully from 1992 to 2012. He is a Harry Jerome Award winner for excellence in business for Word Magazine, along with his dear partner, Donna McCurvin. Before this, Phil acquired years of experience in radio and television broadcasting as the advertising manager at CIUT, University of Toronto Radio 89.5, and a key contributor to the launch of UT's campus and community radio station in 1987, and as a researcher at CBC National TV News, including a reporter at CBC TV News Windsor. He studied political science at the University of Toronto, just like me. I don't know if he went to Scarborough College. I went to Scarborough College, but you know. But let's welcome for the first time, but not the last time, Mr. Phil Vassell. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. Always appreciated sitting down and chopping things up with you.
Yeah, glad we do a lot of chopping up.
We do that, so I'm looking forward to a great evening.
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. Phil and I had not spoken with each other for a while, but over the last few months, we've had some pretty consistent communication, and I'm offering my help wherever I can. He asks me questions, he asks my insight, and I say I'm just here to serve. So once you have a chance to meet him through this, you'll know he's doing the right things with the right reason and the right intent, and he's been doing that for a long time. So
Thank you.
Appreciate you and the great work you and Don have been doing over the number of years.
Thank you. If we stand tall, know that while we've played a leadership role and all those things that you mentioned, it couldn't be done without a team, and
True.
as one of our mentors like to say, teamwork makes the dream work, Mr. George Fraser.
Ironic little sidebar story. I don't know of this new app called Clubhouse.
Yes, yes.
George Fraser is on that app twice a week.
That must be something.
Oh
I
my
haven't been there
gosh.
yet.
George, it's George. It's like when you hear him, for me anyways, it's like I'm hearing for the first time. His depth is he's even at a higher level.
I think George has been a mentor of mine for over 20 years for sure. I was, along with Donna, was responsible for bringing him here for a speaking engagement, a couple of speaking engagements at the time. And, I'd heard about George and what he was doing in Cleveland. And I thought, wow, what a guy. And so I called him, it was a cold call,
Okay.
and I called him up and I said, hey, you don't know me, but dot, 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 dot. And by the end of the conversation, he says to me, oh, I'd love to come to Toronto. And I said, well, why don't we do it? And so I was given the responsibility of coordinating this event, Donna and I, and he came, he hit it out of the park, as he always seems to do.
Absolutely.
And was such a motivational speaker. It didn't take long for other people to want him to come and speak to them as well. And so he's as popular a speaker in Toronto as any of our African American brothers and sisters have been. And to this day, it's like getting sustenance, when you speak to George. George is a master motivator, and the older he gets, the more wisdom he has.
Absolutely. And you know what? He's at the point now, he don't care. Well, he never used to care what he says. Now he really don't care what he says. And he cusses every once in a while, and he says some pretty risque jokes once in a while, but he has a point where he's just saying it as it is and just letting it lie.
Letting it fly. And I think it's also due to the fact that as the clock ticks, as time ticks away, perhaps some people have less time to waste and don't suffer fools gladly, and I, if that's how he's become, I can't say I blame him, because there's so many people who get so much when he sits down and talks. So I would not be surprised if he's a fan favorite in Clubhouse.
Oh, absolutely. He actually, we'll get to Phil in a second, but people, if you haven't heard of George Fraser, please check him out. Really and truly.
Yes.
He is one of the gems of our people. And a few weeks ago, I was on Clubhouse when he was sharing, and guess who had a chance to speak with him? Sam Burke.
Yes, Sam Burke actually told me that George was on Clubhouse, and I was being invited, but somehow I couldn't get connected, and I just kind of said, okay, maybe some of the time. But I think it was Sam who pointed out to me, that Fraser was just as dynamic, a speaker there as he is, in person.
Yeah, I will actually one time did have a chance to ask him on Clubhouse. I said, Mr. Fraser, what would your words of wisdom be for Black men and Black fathers? And wow. And especially for Black fathers, he said, especially with their children, have them pursue education and spend as much time as you can with them. Now, I'm paraphrasing what he said, because he said it much more eloquently than I just did. But after he finished, I was good.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's soul food, man. It is definitely soul food when you talk to George.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about you a little bit. Like, we got that little bio, and I know you a fair bit, but for our audience, where were your beginnings? Where you grew up? Obviously, you went to University of Toronto, but what was young Phil like?
I'm trying to figure what young Phil was like because I need to share some of that with with the next generation, especially with my two daughters. And you know, I was talking to Denham Jolly
Oh,
a
yes.
couple of years back, and I was congratulating him on his book winning a special Toronto Award, and it was, an autobiographical story. Talked about, his beginnings in Jamaica, and the travel, the journey to Toronto, the journey to his success and all of that stuff, the obstacles that he had to overcome. And, I read, as soon as I got that book in my hands, I read it cover to cover because I was born in basically the same part of Hanover, Jamaica. He lived on one side called Davis Cove. I lived on the other side called Cousins Cove. And this was, you know, um, for anybody who's familiar with some of the larger cities, it was about 8 miles from Lucy, the capital of Hanover. And if you wanted to go to the beach, it was about 15 minutes to Negril Beach, you know.
Mhm.
And so that was where I was born initially, and, spent my first, years in primary school there. I got to secondary school, but shortly after, I think grade eight, that's when I relocated here. My parents were already here, and I relocated here in Toronto. And, that's where that journey started. Um, you know, it's interesting that when I think about that time, I think of, being blessed by having some teachers that looked out for me,
Mm.
you know, and, kind of took the approach. One guy in particular, um, Victor Williams, he became, like a big brother. I never saw him as a teacher. And since I'm the first of seven, I didn't have a big brother. So, you know,
Okay.
I saw him as kind of a big brother. And, I guess he saw something in me. And, we connected in a way that he was always demanding more because he felt that there was more that he saw. And so he was one of the first people that, kind of pushed me to work harder in school, to, be the best person you can be.
Okay.
And understanding that, you have to be a leader at the same time. And in
Mhm.
my case, that was easily understood because if I was first of seven, then you could not skirt around and not provide the
Sure.
leadership that was expected of you. You know,
Wow. Wow.
so that's the first part, and then I came here and lived in Toronto, and went to um, I spent a week in a senior public school because back then it was the common practice that if you have completed a grade in the Caribbean and possibly other places as well, they want you to repeat that grade.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm not having this. I just completed grade eight. I'm not going back to grade eight. I know the work. I've done the work. I did very well, as a matter of fact. And so I demanded to the principal that I be moved to another school, and he was like, "Well, this is how we do it."
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, how do I prove it to you that I'm quite capable of handling the work and need to be in the next grade up. And he says, well, this was Thursday or Friday of the first week in September. And, I'd only arrived in Canada about a week before that and didn't know my way around. So long story short, he said to me, okay, we'll give you a test. And Monday morning, late Friday, I did the test, and Monday morning, I heard my name over the intercom, and all the kids started teasing, "Oh, you're in trouble, Phil." All that. Uh-oh, that kind of thing. And so I went in, not expecting, that I was going to be met with an apology from the principal, who said,
Wow.
"Phil, I'm sorry, you were right. You did very well on the test, and you should be going to a grade 9 program."
Wow.
I've only been in the country for a week, and my response was, "Where's the nearest school?" Because I didn't want to be.
You
I
don't
didn't,
want to be there.
I didn't want to be
You
out.
want out. You want out.
And so he said, well, Oakwood Collegiate is just up the street. And my response immediate was, okay, then I'll go to Oakwood, because
Right.
I was going to have to walk to and from and all of that. I wasn't sure, the workings and all of that. So went to Oakwood, had a great time in high school. And from there, U of T, studied poli-sci, and got involved in a number of things. And I would say this to anybody, looking back at their life, certainly looking back at mine, um, it's the extracurricular things that you do. Have a lot of interest, but know that more often than not, the extracurricular stuff that you do will impact your life perhaps more so than the courses that you study. And that was the case for me, because, while at U of T, I got involved in, a couple of things. One was radio. The other was a newspaper, Contrast, while I was still in high school going to university. And I volunteered at Contrast to learn how to become a writer. And, I always had a passion for radio. So I got involved in CIUT, did a radio show there. It was one of the more popular ones based on our fundraising drives each year. And, that kind of whetted my appetite. I was, upon graduation, became the first station advertising manager at what was then called CIUT, still CIUT, 89.5 on the St. George campus. And from there, I got involved in commercial radio, what was then DC 103. I was there not for very long, but it was going to get me to where I wanted to go. And at that time, it wasn't in front of the camera, it was as an ad salesperson, right? So I did that. And within 6 weeks of doing that, I received a call for a job interview at CBC Television.
What?
I'd put some, application in a number of places. And at that point, I said to a friend of mine who would actually give me the contact back then, I said, I got this call, but I'm enjoying myself out in Orangeville, Ontario, selling advertising at a radio station, and looking forward to getting back to Toronto, because you had to go out and learn earn your stripes.
Mm-hmm.
So I got, the interview. I went in. There were 15 people being interviewed. They were going to hire 2. I was, I think, the second to last person being interviewed. And again, I was very successful in the interview. The person, who was leading the interview, it was a group of three. I still remember David Bazet says to me, so Phil, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask us? And this is after going through this interview where they tested your knowledge. We want to see how well you stay in touch with the news. So while I'm sitting there waiting, I grab the newspapers and I leaf through the newspapers, and I'm waiting because with a name called Vassell, you're way down there. So I grabbed the paper and I was wrestling through the paper. And so every question that they asked me that morning, in some way related to something I had read. And of course, this blew them away. And I'm enjoying myself with the interview. And David says, so Phil, is there any questions you'd like to ask us? And they're smiling, I'm smiling. And I said, when do I begin? And they broke up laughing. And, and I knew I was being precocious, okay?
Yeah.
At that point, I felt I had nothing to lose. I thought I did well in the interview, know. And worst case scenario, if I didn't get that, I was going to go right back to my old job. So there was a degree of comfort there. But, I felt confident that I nailed it based on the questions and the kind of things that we're asking. And that's how I, got my big break in terms of the news business, and got a great deal of opportunity. As you said, I got a chance to work in Windsor, Ontario, as a reporter. And on the weekend, I had an opportunity to not just be a researcher, but, to produce segments and to do a number of other things, and just got very comfortable with the requirements of the job. Spent some time at CBC News World. And again, all of this was just a series of steps that when you look back at all of that was preparing me for what would become Word Magazine. And so, 5 years into this, I got married. Donna and I got married, and we go on our vacation. We come back, and we're like, so what now? And while we were on vacation, we realized that we wanted to do something for ourselves. And I had this passion. She shared this passion for starting a publication that spoke to, our needs as young Black urban professionals and others who had a passion for the arts, and all of that. And so, I got a call. I got a chance to speak to David, and I said to David at the time, David, I think I'm going to need some time off, to explore this thing. And he was pretty gracious. I got to give him lots of credit because he could have said no. And I took a year leave of absence from CBC. And a year later, what do you know? David calls me back and says, Phil, are you coming back? And I said, David, with all due respect, I can't just walk away from a dream. This has always been something I wanted to do. And at this point in time, walking away doesn't seem like a good idea. And he was pretty cool about it. He said, look, I completely understand. Know that if you decide down the road that this is not for you, the tent is open.
Nice.
And that's all I needed, because again, I knew that, whatever happened, I would land on my feet.
There you go. There you go.
So it was that it's been quite a journey, and Word, as you know, lasted for well over 20 years.
Yeah.
Became an award-winning publication. We had a lot of interesting stories, and um, became a platform for a lot of young talent, not just young writers, some established writers as well. And I think um, I knew that we were hitting it out of the park when those established writers offered to write for Word magazine, which was a pretty big deal for a young guy at the time, because these people would not be caught dead getting published in a publication that they didn't respect. And so for me, that just added greater fuel to the fire. And like I said, we gave a lot of people an opportunity to express themselves. I wasn't the kind of editor that told you what to do, nor did I write stinging editorials. I felt it was more important to lead from behind,
Sure.
to be that person that provided some guidance from behind. And 20 years after that, we look back with a sense of pride. We look back with a lot of people still come up to me and ask me, why don't you bring Word back? Because now's the time. And my first response was, you know, that was the time.
Time. Yes. That was the time. Was it hard walking away from Word?
It's never easy walking away from anything that you've put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it. And it was like 20 years. Nobody gave us a chance. Over 20 years, nobody gave us a chance. But one thing that, you know, we, again, looking back, we get a sense of, yeah, that was the right decision. You started to look around and you started to see a number of bigger, more powerful publications failing, because the internet had taken over at that time. 75% of the advertising was being, you know, had by Google, and Facebook came on and was
Sure.
taking a lot of ad revenue from a lot of people. So I knew that long term it was going to be a tough struggle beyond those years that we'd put in.
Sure.
So we just had to face reality. And then, because we were also always doing more than one thing at the same time, we were producing the Toronto Urban Music Festival, which became a huge deal. And we also produced the IRIE Music Festival. In fact, we started the Toronto Urban Music Festival, which then gave birth to the IRIE Music Festival, because we wanted to merge those two worlds. And at the time, those two worlds weren't talking to each other. I remember, bringing a female singer from Parliament Funkadelic to CNE grounds as part of the Toronto Urban Music Festival, thinking, now, here's someone who's a star from back in the day, and who doesn't love P-Funk and Parliament Funkadelic? Well, it didn't go too well. She was booed off the stage.
Oh.
And I remember having to console her in the back, because the fans came to hear hip hop
Yeah.
and, some of the neo soul stuff that we were featuring as well.
Yeah.
So we had that going. We had the IRIE Music Festival going. We did a few other things as well. So, it was more of a smooth transition than it might have been to just shut the doors and you don't know what you're going to do next.
Okay.
So that part wasn't as traumatic, but I'd say it not only left an indelible, impact on me. I know this speaking from my own self, But I also know that a number of people have said that to us and have encouraged us to one day archive that information in order to share it, because we were tackling, not just writing about the music of the day and music from the African diaspora,
Mm-hmm.
hip hop and R&B and jazz included, but we were writing about, music from the continent. Now it's lumped in as Afrobeat. Back then it was high life and it was soukous and it was, all these other things. And we were opening up eyes, to artists here, there, reggae, soca artists. We were, as I said, we were right across the diaspora. And I think in a way it captured the zeitgeist, because Toronto was, the most culturally diverse city, still is. And so you had all that mix here, and people connected with it because we were connecting with them through music and the arts. We from time to time would touch some of the more challenging issues like policing and other things. AIDS, we, as a Black publication, we tackled an AIDS pandemic.
Absolutely. I remember those. Yeah. Yeah.
We tackled all the illnesses, malaria and TB.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the impact of the tsunami in Malaysia and that region. So we weren't just cultivating the arts and writing about theater and dance and all of that and music. We were also giving people a little bit of, substance that makes the music go down easy.
Right. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna take a little bit of a short break, and when we come back from a little break, Phil will be telling us what he's been doing post those days and what a project he's working on. We'll talk about it when we come back from the break.
Sure.
So
Okay.
Give us a little bit of a break. We'll be back in just a second, and it's Black Henna talking with Dr. Vibe. Okay, we may have a break.
Everybody, it's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show.
What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here. What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here. What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here. What is up, everybody? It is Dr. Vibe here.
Just had an awesome experience. He is a really good interviewer.
The conversations that we have and the passion that he has for people and helping people.
So smoothly that you would have thought that we had known each other for years.
Big shout out to Dr. Vibes. I had the opportunity, the pleasure, and the privilege to join him last evening.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And you can check out more great content like this on my website. Also follow me on social media. Remember, it's Dr. Vibe, the home of epic conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations. And remember, live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get small to get stronger. Block assumptions and aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Love, faith, and respect. And remember to give yourself grace.
Everybody,
we are back. So back with Phil Vassell, journeying through his wonderful career. It hasn't stopped yet. It's still going strong. He's doing some other great things. So Phil, before we went on the break, you were giving some memories of IRIE, Toronto Music Festival, and now you're into a new opportunity, I would call it.
Well, opportunity on some levels, yes. To respond to your question, it seems like we never sit still. The older you get, the more you realize how precious time becomes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was part of that sense that, I'm not 30 anymore. You know what I mean?
Neither am I.
And,
wish I was, though.
Well, there are days and there are days.
Yeah, that's true. That's not every day. When I get out of bed in the morning, I wish I was 30. Let's put it that way sometimes.
Yes. But one of the common threads that I noticed when you start to reflect on your life, one of the common threads is music. At least 60% of Word Magazine dealt with music. And that's over a period of 25 years. We also did the Toronto Urban Music Festival when, urban music was not getting airplay anywhere. Hip hop was a dirty word to some radio programmers, mainstream radio programmers in the city. So we saw an opportunity to showcase the emerging talent that we were seeing in Toronto. And, for, anybody who is a millennial now, it was pre-Drake and pre The Weeknd.
Yep.
And, there were guys like Maestro and Cardi, some of who you might know, that were still making great music at the time. And, we became a platform to showcase, Canadian urban talent, that were called at the time, hip hop and R&B, and as I said initially, reggae and even reggaeton was part of the mix in African music. And we later decided let's separate some of this stuff and maybe create two things instead of one. So the Toronto Urban Music Festival really became about hip hop and R&B, and IRIE Music Festival sort of became that diasporic thing. But long story short, you look at all of those things, and music was a common thread. And I kept feeling, as I read about what was taking place in the United States in terms of documenting their history, with the Smithsonian Black History and Culture Museum, the National African American Museum for Music in Tennessee. As I began to look at those things, as I began to look at the African American Music Archive, I started having questions of my own about what we have here, or the lack thereof.
Yes.
And so I started looking and saying, well, it might as well be me, because yes, we've got over 20 plus years of word content, music content. We have, as many years of live music content, and that's a great starting point to begin to say to the world that Black musicians in Canada have also made a lasting contribution. And it didn't just happen yesterday. The first Black person was recorded as being in Canada in 1601. Okay, so that's a long time. And when you think about the other piece of so many of our great musicians, including Dr. Oscar Peterson, never, despite his greatness, won a Juno Award in a jazz category.
That's scary.
He was given a special award, okay, the kind of thing you do, a Lifetime Achievement Award to Dr. Vibe for all the work that he's done. And I'm not dismissing that by any stretch of the imagination. I'm simply saying to you that what it says is our mainstream institutions did not do a good job once you begin to look at what was done through a lens of inclusiveness, through a lens of equity, through a lens of acknowledging that Black people have been here and have continued to contribute since 1601. Okay, so when I think about, that piece, and I've always worked with students in the summertime the more you spoke to them, the more you realize how little they knew of Canadian Black history. And they'll tell you, we want to know more about Canadian Black history. And it's not for a lack of them wanting to, but also when you look at our school curriculum, it doesn't reflect that either. And so the more I looked into it, and the more I realized that if you go to Library and Archives Canada or you go to the National Music Center, a lot of that history has yet to be told. And I think it's incumbent on us in the Black community, within the Black community, to not sit and complain about, a perceived wrong. I mean, yes, it is wrong. But I think we ourselves as a community, individually, collectively, whichever way you want, we need to do some of these things for ourselves. Yes, you want allies. You'll always need allies. As Dennis Brown sang many years ago, no man is an island, no man stands alone. It's going to take teamwork, as we said, from the great George Fraser. So we have, over the past year, got some, startup funding that allowed us to train 12 interns on, information management skills, Web 2.0 skills, along with assisting us in terms of the research necessary to gather, sort, and preserve. And once we establish the website, celebrate, these people going back to the great Nathaniel Dett in the 1800s, for whom the Nathaniel Dett Chorale was named, and so to me, it's our way of giving back, those of us who have experienced, some of these great talents. It's our way as a former publisher. It is my way of giving back and sharing the knowledge that I have from having researched, written, published about these artists, some of these artists at least.
Nice. When you came up with that idea, what was Donna's thought on that? Was she saying, "Oh my goodness, more work," or was she up for it?
I think the answer is she was, for many years, being as passionate as she is about Word Magazine. For many years, she was always suggesting that Word Magazine needs to be archived first and foremost. And I guess, there's a strong case that could be made about that, because we've gotten a number of people, some of the writers, some of the readers, who've suggested that. We've gotten calls from university campuses and other places asking about this stuff. And so this is something that we will be doing, okay? But I felt that given what I was doing day to day, with a common thread being music, I felt that given the huge gap that was there from people that we've spoken to, we had a senior archivist who actually worked in the Library and Archives Canada, and he was like, "Phil, there's so much work to be done. You can't even believe it." It's not to say there's nothing, but there's so much that's left to be documented, undocumented. And I think it's important that, whatever legacy we leave, we need to understand how empowering having this legacy researched, documented, preserved can be for the next generation. It's an inspiration. There were people that inspired me before I got onto journalism, and whatever area of, discipline that you work in, there's always someone who came before you that laid the tracks and allowed you to be the best that you can be.
Absolutely.
And so, it's that old saying, if we stand tall, is because we're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors.
No, I think I'm very passionate about what you're sharing about now, because documenting our history and controlling our narrative are very passionate to me. So you're speaking my language here, because every one of the 2,000 episodes I've done online are archived. I have possession of them, and they will live past my time. That is my goal and purpose, to show the journeys of many of our people around the world. So I am very in sync with what you're saying. I think it's incredibly important, and it must be interesting having these conversations with students, and they're going, huh, like,
Well,
it's fun.
it's interesting. I don't want to throw shade at these interns, because they came by it honestly.
Sure.
Meaning that, mainstream media, one of the mandates of the CBC, okay, one of the mandates of the CBC is to reflect Canada back to itself. Okay, I remember reading that, and being struck by that, and I felt that, that's something that's worthy. We need to look at ourselves as well and say, are we reflecting Canada as we know it?
Good point.
And the answer is no. My answer to that question is no. So if we're not having this in the school system, if we're not having in media, and I'm extremely sensitive to what's on the media as a publisher, as a former broadcaster, TV journalist, that stuff matters. And nobody can tell me that none of that stuff, which shapes who we are every day based on what you see, what you're exposed to, what you hear, all that, popular culture also has a role to play. So if we're not taking the bull by the horns and saying, this is important for the next generation and for future generations, then what are we leaving behind? So music being, that connecting tissue, I thought this is a great way to tell our story, bridge the gap, and to begin to fill that big donut of a hole that exists in terms of all the brilliant artists that we've had over the years, and they're not just mainstream hip hop and R&B and jazz artists. Canada is a country of immigrants, and there's some great musicians who came here for a better life. It's like the old cab story that you hear. All these, cab drivers with post-secondary education and degrees, masters and whatnot, who don't necessarily get an opportunity to practice what they've been taught. Similarly, this kind of thing happens as well with musicians. Some are national, international sensations, but you're never going to read about them in one of your daily newspapers. You're never going to hear them get a spin in one of the mainstream broadcasting stations. And again, I go back to this. Even those who've been accorded a license, a radio station license, have a duty to reflect the population back to itself. You know what I'm saying? That's a condition. That's a condition of license. Okay. Now, we can't fight all the battles, but I'm saying that one that we certainly could do something about is to say, let's start. Let's build on this. And once we're gone, much like you say, with those 2,000 recordings, that stuff needs to be archived.
Question here from Sarah Yango, who is an incredible journalist based in the Ottawa area. What are Phil's thoughts on what CBC Radio Canada and other publicly funded media have been offering in the last few years in terms of content about the Black experience in Canada, e.g. Black in Canada?
I would say, as a former CBCer, I would say it's long overdue. It's that very notion that I was referring to about reflecting Canada back to itself. Okay, and I have very strong views on this because I know, having worked at CBC, you know, you do need to be cognizant of geographic representation, so from east to west, that kind of thing. There must do stories on, Canada's First Nations. You can almost check these things off. Ottawa politics, you got to check those things off. But there are those other stories that gives Canada a better sense as to its people that I think are essential. That we need to reflect that, reflect people in 3D. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I don't want the coverage just to be about a protest. Yeah. I don't want the coverage to be just about some incredible athletic accomplishment. We're that and more. So if you're committed to reflecting the Black experience in Canada, then one would think that it's an easy argument to say, let's reflect that too.
Mm-hmm. More than fair. Then let me ask then, how do you feel compared to your time when you were involved in media? How would you rate the progress on a scale of 1 to 10 right now, or where are we at on a scale of 1 to 10 in regards to proper representation in front of the camera and behind the camera?
Oh, you want to get me in trouble now, my friend?
Oh, well, you're an independent journalist, so you can do whatever you want.
No, I would say this. When I was there, and that was a long time ago, okay, yep. 30 years ago, maybe. When I was there, I was one of 2 Black folks in the newsroom. There were others that were working behind the camera, that were there. There were people, there were Black journalists at CBC Radio that you never got to see that they were Black, but because they weren't Black sounding, you might not know who they are. But that has changed in many ways that now, I know at CBC at 6, for example, you've got Dwight Drummond.
Yeah, in Toronto.
Yep. In Toronto, who's the anchor. I know also that the assignment editor, someone that I started with at CBC way back when, Jean Carter. And as a sister, it's great to see her in that position. So
there's also on CFTO News at 6. What's his name?
And Nathan Downer is
Downer, yes.
Nathan Downer is there. So there has been, positive changes. And I think, if you do a wide sweep in terms of people of color in newsrooms across Canada, you're going to find that it's not in keeping with our percentages in the broader population. It's not where it used to be, and it's not where they want to be. We on CBC, for example, there aren't many Black national reporters.
That's true.
International reporters, well, we're not there either. You know what I mean? So there's still some ways to go, and I think that we're also starting to see more opportunities on administrative level, journalistic level, that kind of thing. So, I think it's overdue for these changes to happen. Um, Having said that, I have to acknowledge that, it's great to turn on my television each night, Monday to Friday, and see Dwight telling me about the top stories of the day. And I remember Dwight when, I was at CBC. There are other journalists, Black journalists at CTV as well, and you're starting to see more in front of the camera. It's harder to say, what's going on behind the camera, and it's harder to say who is in a decision-making position, either in front of the camera or behind the camera, for that matter.
Yeah, it's well, I think another light of optimism. We also have to mention Tracy Moore, who's been hosting City Line for
Absolutely.
years, and also a good sign too is the resurgence of the CABJ, the Canadian Association of Black Journalists, is there again.
It's doing their thing, and Marcia Ian, she became a member of Parliament after working for years.
Yeah.
There are some people within the system, and it would be totally, silly to suggest that there hasn't been, some positive changes, and perhaps, given the moment that we're living in, whether you call it this woke moment, whether you call it, the post George Floyd BLM protest moment, I think what is taking place right now is there's a high level of sensitivity, that more needs to be done, and I suspect that we're going to see more getting done, because we're at a moment in time where I don't think people are going to accept that anymore.
Yeah, well, we'll see if there's agents of change, because we're hearing about it. Let's hope that we see it also. I also would love a hope that we'd have a Black-owned national network or networks in this country, because I think controlling the narrative is very, very important, as you mentioned, and I know it is. So it's something I'd like to say. Sarah's saying here, CAB 2.0 is doing a splendid job promoting Black journalists and nurturing future Black media professionals. Very, very true. We need better representation in front of the camera, behind the camera, and for me, the dream would have a Black network.
Well, I think you have to realize a few things. And I was having this conversation with someone who was taking a look at the journalism practiced by Blacks in the 80s in Toronto, and opportunities that were there for them, or the lack of opportunities that was there for them, particularly in terms of alternative media, Black media, that kind of thing. And one thing that I remember saying to him is that, there's certain realities, business realities, having, published a magazine for over 20 years, there's certain business realities that, still dog us to this day. And we have to take some responsibility for that. And this is why I think that, yes, you can dream big dreams and hope that you can have a network. We don't necessarily have to put it on radio. We don't even have to put it on TV.
No, you don't have to. The platforms like this.
It's going to be an online platform before it's anything else, because that's where the opportunity is.
Yeah.
Okay. Having said that, I think that the business case is one that we're constantly having to make. And I remember that was the hardest thing I had to do, when we published Word Magazine, because, you know, there's certain perceptions, misperceptions that are out there about, you know, the Black community. And at the time, people frowned upon doing research based on race in this country. That was not the case in the US, obviously, and you could get that data readily in terms of the US, but all you could do is to guess at that here and try to work with that. And even having to do that as a publication on your own is very expensive, let alone a national media organization that is Black owned and operated. So the business case, getting the marketing agencies to see the Black community, not just for its size, because on a size basis, they're going to throw up roadblocks, but on its ability to influence a broader cross section of people, you know, as tastemakers, as people who are able to influence their friends and, you know, relatives and all that. It's taken a long time getting to a point where you have people who are gatekeepers, you know, the marketing agencies and things like that, the media agencies. It's taken a while to get them to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But I think if it's ever going to happen, it's much more likely to be something that happens online. And I would encourage anyone thinking of starting now, you know, if I were starting now, how could you ignore the internet as a starting point?
There you go. Well, we've kept you a while, and I know you always have things to do and are always got things on the go. Before we let you go, Sarah has a question here. How can the public support your initiative?
Well, thanks for that question, Sarah. I was, to be honest with you, I was somewhat hesitant today in talking about it, largely because I wanted to, you know, go public with this information once the website was up and fully operational, because what this will be, the Canada Black Music Archive, will be digital, completely digital by default, as Shopify's CEO once said about Shopify, meaning that we're not interested in building a big, fantastic looking building as they've done in DC with the Black History Museum there. I'll leave that for somebody else who wants to do that kind of thing. But my interest is with the current generation and future generation, and to really appeal to millennials, I think it's important that we understand where we are right now in terms of the digital economy, in terms of how they access news and information, where they go to for this information. So thinking about all of that, having two daughters who, you know, who are part of that millennial generation, it seemed obvious to me that making it accessible was one of the key things that you had to make sure that you were doing. A number of museums, a number of archives are now trying to make somewhat of a shift. They won't do it completely, but they realize, particularly with the pandemic and how quickly things were changing, they realize they too have to get on that train or get left behind. So for me, it's very important that when we go public, I wanted Sarah to say, here's the proof of concept, here is the site. We're still working on designing the site, but we've had 12 interns who've done incredible research on these different artists and facilitators, because there's some people who were not artists themselves, but also contributed as facilitators. We want to acknowledge not just the musicians, but the people who made way and opportunities, creating opportunities for the musicians as well. So it's once we determined that we wanted to do that, we realized that this is a big job because let's face it, churches were one of the few places where if you were a young Black singer back in the day, it's one of the few places where you could go and practice your craft. Some clubs became the only venue that you could go and perform. And there's a history of jazz musicians here who will tell you stories about how difficult it was in the 50s and 60s to play in a quote unquote white club. So there are people and individuals who have made a contribution, promoters who have made a contribution, radio personalities that have made a contribution, radio station owners. Now we can talk about Denham and what he has done and Fitzroy Gordon in terms of what he's done. All of these are part and parcel of telling a much larger story about our contributions to this society. And all we're saying is it's up to us to do what we can to make this a reality. And we are going to, in the coming weeks, put out a call to the general public after letting them know that this is happening. We didn't want to be deluged with people providing information before we were ready to absorb that information, because as I said, we started doing some research with the interns, plus we've got over 20 years of Word archival material from which to draw. That's not it by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, as Bishop Tutu once said when he came to Toronto in a speech, he says, in Africa, we have the saying, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. So we want to make sure that we're taking all the right steps, Sarah, in terms of pulling this particular initiative together. We think it has the capacity to link all those other places that have, you know, documented some aspects of this history. And we want to be the hub through which other people, not just our community, but especially our community, can learn from, academics can learn from, professors and writers can learn from, students can learn from. That's the bigger picture in terms of what we're doing. So, as I said, in the next few months, we'll be launching the first iteration of this. But as you know, with any archive or any museum, this is something that, you know, that needs to be built, and it takes time for it to be built. And in the meantime, we're communicating with a number of people in the industry who are doing similar kinds of work, or they're allies and want to embrace the work that we're doing. So, you know, it's a big job. We're getting there. And at some point, we'll also put a call out to volunteers because, again, it takes teamwork to make the dream work.
All right. Well, Phil, I'd like to say thank you and Donna and anyone who's been part of your team throughout the years for all the incredible work. I can truly say that Phil and Donna have been working on a passion project for many of their lives, and the fruits. You know, I was just thinking as you were just sharing there, how many people both of you have either directly or indirectly added light or given breakthroughs to.
Well, I don't like to think of it that way. You know, yes, that's one of the outcomes. But I think many, many years ago, one of the person that influenced me as a young kid growing up in Jamaica at the time was hearing this story that, you know, Marcus Garvey had a publication that was read around the world. And for me, as a young child, that was like mind-blowing. The same newspaper that I'm holding is being read by people around the world. So that that kind of opened up my mind to the possibility that, yes, you can reach people with a newspaper being, the primary platform at the time. And so I wanted to be part of that, in some way, shape, or form. And, like I said, whether it's radio, whether it's television, whether it's online or print, I think at the end of the day, it's about empowering people. It's about sharing knowledge and information and entertainment and bringing Black joy to people who are in need of that, because, the other half of the story is rarely told when you tune in to mainstream media. So like you, who have done an amazing job, I think we need to celebrate people like yourselves for whom it's a passion project.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And, I'll end with this little story because it too has shaped me. And again, if we stand tall, it's because we're on the shoulders of others. I remember when I got the call at CBC for a job interview. I went hesitantly, as I said, and then they called me and said, "You have the job." And I shared it with two people that were close to me at the time. And I remember they both says, "Well, if you say no because you want to be in advertising, Phil, you'll be one of the first to say no to CBC. That might not age well." You know what I mean? And secondly, the other person, this was a South Asian friend of mine, and I remember her, Charlotte, to this very day. Charlotte says to me, "Phil, in life you can do two things. You can pursue your passion, or you can pursue your pension."
Wise words.
And I thought about it for a little bit, and then I said to her, "Is there a third option?" And she responded as you did, and she says, "Well, I guess it could be." I said, "Can I make my passion my pension?" And that's the journey so far.
There you go. Wonderful last words to close off with, Phil. Phil, thanks again for you and Donna and everything you have done, are doing, and I'm speaking it will be doing. Please keep us updated on this project.
Well, thank you so much, Ed. And you've been a booster from back in the day, Word Magazine and all of that. I remember you worked at a music label back then.
Yeah, I was. It's actually interesting you're mentioning that, because funny story, I am a panelist on a panel at Canadian Music Week this week coming up. And it's like first circle coming all the way around that I'm going to be talking on a panel at CMW. And for those, myself and there's another gentleman, Craig Mannix.
I know Craig quite well. Big C.
Big C. We were one of probably the first two Black Canadians hired as marketing reps at a major label in this country.
How many years ago? Can I ask?
Oh man, that's going back. Here's another interesting fact. At the same time, I was working in the administrative offices in Adidas Canada.
That's right.
And historically I was the second Black person hired in Adidas Canada's office historically. So I don't think there's many people that can say they worked at a major record label internationally and a major sports company internationally at the same time.
And interestingly enough, I know Big C. I know Craig for a long, long time as well.
Yeah.
And like you, he also entered into the fashion space.
Yep.
So there'll be lots of stuff to talk about. Send me a note as to when it's happening. I'd love to tune in.
I will send the information. Actually, they were asking, I got reached out, and it's funny because the person who reached out to me is much younger than myself, but he knows some people, or she knows some people that I know, and they're going to be talking about, how to handle the microaggressions and all this stuff. And I'm happy because getting it from a Black male perspective and working in as many organizations, corporate and non-corporate, that I have, it's going to be interesting. I'm wondering, just curiously, if I'll see anyone in the digital audience that goes back to my days at Universal Music. So I'm looking forward.
I think you were a trailblazer for sure.
Thank you.
And we're at a point where Canada can boast 3 of the top male artists in the world in terms of Drake, The Weeknd, and Justin Bieber.
Yeah.
And that's a long way from when you were there.
Gosh, oh yeah, it was a struggle and fight at times, but there were some individuals who were believers who didn't look like me. One lady in particular, she's not in the industry anymore. I watched a few people. Sarah Norris, I have to hail up to.
I remember Sarah
Norris. There was a great gentleman named Kevin Shea.
Kevin, yes, I know Kevin.
And also Bill Banham. Those were 3, especially Bill Banham and Kevin Shea, were great supporters. And actually, Bill was the main person I had that gig at Universal Music. Mm-hmm. And we still somewhat keep in contact with today. And it was a great ride for the time that was there. And I'm glad that people like the Big C's and the Cardinals are now getting decision-making positions. It took way too long, but they're there and they have the evaluated experience. So I haven't seen Big C in a long time. We obviously communicate digitally, but we got to keep on pushing, right?
Well, I think Cardinals
Cardinal too, yes.
His new gig, I think, is one of the most highest profile gigs that I think a Black person has had at any one of the record companies. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, him and Big C are in the same house, so we're speaking that there'll be positive change and both right people at the right time. Again, they both have the evaluated experience. We just pray that they get the ability to make the decisions that need to be made, and the action is backed up. The action is backed up. So I'm confident that those things will go through, and anything that I can possibly do to support them, I am there for them.
Well, it's a great time to be them, because now I think the level of awareness that we saw, as a result of those protests last summer, I think, it's unprecedented. Apparently over 20 million people participated globally in the BLM protest, and nobody's ever seen the level of diversity that was a part of that experience. So the world is changing, whether or not some people want to change. And the best part is the young generation is not down with the old generation on, maintaining the chains that bind, shall we speak.
Great closing thoughts. Take care, my man. We'll be in touch. And I'd like to say thank you for everyone who watched this conversation live on replay today. We have some final comments. Sarah Yongo saying, fabulous interview. Thanks for all those years of contributing to the culture. Phil, the years haven't stopped yet. He's still got a lot going on, and make sure I'm going to keep on pushing him. And Sylvia Paris, hashtag follow your passion. Also, hashtag find unique ways in. Hashtag the rear view mirror teaches. So look, folks, thank you so much for watching this live on the replay or listening to this on replay. My name is Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of epic conversations. And I'm the host of Epic Conversations 2020 Best Podcast News Award winner, 2018 Innovation Award winner given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. Also, host of the only online show in the world for fathers and dads that is sponsored by Dove Men Care, also co-sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization, and I am the board chair for the Global Food and Drink Initiative, which is a multimedia not-for-profit that showcases Blacks in the diaspora that are doing their thing in food, wine, and travel. I'd like to thank a few people. I thank Sarah and thank also Sylvia for tuning in today, and others. I'd like to close out with this. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get small to get stronger. Block assumptions and aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. God bless, peace well, keep the faith, love, faith, and respect. Remember to give yourself grace, and thanks to BIA Media for a great production. Bye, everybody.